Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. My goal is to cut through the noise and show you how this tech actually works for your business. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business. We'll explain what it is, why you should care, and how to use it without needing a computer science degree.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, grab your coffee, close that tab where you've been staring at ChatGPT for the past 3 weeks wondering what to do with it, and let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
Welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Jess. And today we're going to be diving into something that will literally transform how you use AI, prompt engineering. So if you've ever been frustrated by generic, unhelpful AI responses, this episode is going to change everything for you. But first, how's your week been, Kyle? Are you excited for your trip?
Very excited for my trip. Excited to be back over in London. Very excited for London Tech Week to see what people are talking about, what are doing. You know, I think we're going to get a lot of AI products, a lot of AI startups. So hopefully we meet some interesting people and, see some things that people are working on. And, I think our plan is to bring a lot of that back here and let people know what we're seeing.
I feel like we're only going to be talking about AI products. I can tell you I am also, because as I think I mentioned last week, I've got a very conference heavy couple of weeks coming up. So for me, next week is South by Southwest London, which is the first instance of South by Southwest that's happening over here. And I can tell you, having looked at the schedule the other week, probably 75% of every panel or anything really is about AI. So I will also report back on that as well.
It's interesting, right? I mean, we talk about this as there's a hype cycle to all of this, and that's part of the adoption curve. Are we overdoing it if 75% of the panels are AI, or, is that representative of what's happening in the industry?
Well, what was really interesting, I think it's going to be a really interesting contrast between South by Southwest London and the Tech Week, because obviously London Tech Week is going to be far more tech heavy. That makes sense. That's its audience. South by Southwest, I think, is going to be much more about the practical applications of it. Obviously, leaning more towards the marketing and advertising space. But because South by is has such a wide range of topics that they cover, it's going to be talking a lot about AI in creativity and AI in film and music, especially music. There's a whole big section on that. So it'll be really interesting to see the contrast, and hopefully I'll have some really interesting stuff to talk about after next week.
And then compare that to, I think you're going to Cannes in
that is right. I am also going to, it's actually Cannes.
Sorry.
Cannes. Yes, Cannes Lions, which is the big advertising festival. And that's in a couple of weeks as well. And that is originally started as a creativity festival, celebrating creative advertising, but it's really just turned into anything and everything to do with media. So that is also going to be extremely AI heavy. I can already tell you, having signed up for quite a few sessions in advance, it's going to be also very AI heavy. So we will have lots to talk about over the next couple of weeks.
Amazing. Well, let's get into this week. Today, we're going to deep dive on one of the most, I think, underrated superpowers when working with AI. And we've chosen this topic because last week we were talking about the tools. Now it's how do you get the most out of the tools? How do you talk to it?
Absolutely. So if you've ever tried any of the LLMs that we talked about last week, so ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or any of them, and you got a response and you were like, that wasn't quite right, or it was just a little generic, then this is going to be the episode for you. This is going to be probably the most important episode that we do in all of our series on where all this stuff begins.
This idea will come up time and time again as we talk about different tools and we talk about different ways to utilize AI for your business. We're always going to talk about how you prompt it, and not just tossing in a question and hoping for the best. There's a real framework behind getting top tier results. Let's start with a question. How many of you have typed something like, help me with marketing? I know, Jess, you're probably cringing at that one. Let's say you said, help me with marketing into ChatGPT and gotten back a response that was so generic, it could probably apply to selling lemonade stand on the street.
I think almost every single person listening just nodded their head because I feel like that's how everyone starts.
Right. But here's the thing. It's not the AI's fault. It's ours. We're essentially walking up to the world's smartest intern and saying, do marketing stuff without giving them any context, role, or expectations of what you want to see.
Okay, Kyle. So let's get into the really nerdy stuff. Put on your nerd glasses.
My
Let's
fave.
get into it. Your favorite. I should put on my nerd glasses. What's happening under the hood of an LLM like ChatGPT when we are prompting it?
Yeah, and we touched upon this last week, so I'll kind of expand on that. ChatGPT or LLMs, they're not thinking as you would think about it, right? It's predicting the next word. So LLMs are trained to predict the next word based on a massive data set of human text, right? We talked about everything it's trained on: books, forums, websites. It's seeing billions of sentences, paragraphs, conversations. So what it's doing is it's trying to guess what should come next in our conversation.
Exactly. So it's basically just got brilliant pattern recognition. And because it's trained on absolutely everything, like we talked about last week, Wikipedia, corporate decks, novels, you have to give it cues so it actually knows which voice to use and actually what you care about.
Right, because it has the full gamut of responses that it could do. It could respond like you're a Reddit user, which is probably not what you want to be using when you're talking about
Not in a
legalese or corporate,
professional, no, not in a
right?
professional environment.
Or vice versa. You may not want to be using really strict legalese when you're trying to write an email to, your family or even in a corporate setting. That's just not
Or
going
if,
to be the right.
if we go back to our conversation about rocket ship emojis, rocket ship emojis are not relevant for a lot of business environments.
Exactly. LLMs don't know what the goal of your prompt is unless you explicitly state it. And we kind of touched on this, but they don't have memory inherently unless you're in a session or use memory features. But think about it, they don't have all the memory of how you speak. So, and they also don't know what matters unless you tell them. So prompting and giving it context fills the gaps in the model's kind of short-term attention span. Like think about it when you start a new chat. Think of it as like a goldfish. It has nothing to go off of. It just has what it was trained on. And it's trained on diverse, conflicting content, as we mentioned. It's seen formal academic explanations. It's seen the casual Reddit threads. It's seen sarcastic jokes and movie scripts. So without instructions, it doesn't know which mode to adopt. So tone, role, audience, all of those things help the model pick the right persona from all of the many learned voices that it's been trained on. Typical thing that we hear, bad data in, bad data out. For AI, garbage in, garbage out is magnified because it's using this probabilistic, trying to predict that next word, this model that it's doing. So, it can be extremely sensitive to phrasing and ambiguity.
So this is the perfect opportunity to tell my favorite garbage in, garbage out AI story, which happened, I think it was last year. You may have seen it in the news, but basically someone asked Google what a good pizza topping would be. And Google AI came back and suggested glue, like putting glue on your pizza. And I think rocks as well. So of course everyone freaked out about this. And it turned out that Google's AI at the time had been signed a deal with Reddit. And so they'd been training off of Reddit data. There was a long running joke on Reddit apparently about putting glue on your pizza. And so that's what the AI came out with. So, a really great example of garbage in, garbage out. But when you look at it more from a business perspective, a really vague prompt like help me with my business could go in 100 different directions because there's so many different elements of your business that you might need help with. So if you give it really specific prompts, that kind of acts as a constraint that channels the model's response into actual useful output instead of just generic crap that it comes out with.
Absolutely.
So you and I always say it's like giving your AI a job description, right?
Yeah. Don't just say, help me write an email. It's more important to give it to give it a framework. We'll break down some of these frameworks later on in the episode, but let me give you a quick example. Rather than saying, don't say, help me write an email, you should say, act like a head of marketing, writing to a B2B SaaS customer. The goal is to re-engage a lead who ghosted me after a demo or something like that. And then you want to give it some tone. So keep it friendly, but professional, or keep it conversational, something I typically say in my prompts.
Yeah. So now the model actually knows the role, the audience, the goal, and the tone because you've given it those very strict instructions in your prompt.
And without giving it, those components, when you leave that out, it's like giving your, smartest intern in the world just a really generic, do something good, right?
Exactly. And as great as interns can be, you have to give them a little bit of direction so that they can learn over time. But really, context is everything. And that's essentially what prompt engineering does. It gives the AI the context, the role, and really clear expectations it actually needs so it can be of use to you.
Yeah. And without proper prompting, we'll kind of say this over and over, but you're basically asking that, maybe not even intern, but like a PhD level expert, right? Because they know everything.
Mhm.
You're asking them to guess what you need. With giving context, you're having a focused conversation with a specialist who understands your business because it'll really dig into the context that's important.
Let's pause here and drop our favorite metaphor, which is that the LLM is your infinite intern. You never need to pay for its lunches, and you never need to worry about it showing up for work late.
Yeah, or maybe being a little hungover, a couple of days here.
Actually, yeah, that's true. It was the hangover, really. That's what it was.
But this intern doesn't show up hungover, and they've read everything ever written, but they have no clue what your business does. They don't know what good looks like. They don't know who they're writing for. You have to tell them.
Yeah, so if you want great results, you don't need to be technical about it. You just need to give your intern, the LLM, some structure. So, for example, a job title, the audience that they're writing for, the goal, and then an example of what good looks like. So we'll get more into examples later, but like examples will make everything that much better.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but when I first started having a conversation with ChatGPT and trying it, it felt like magic. And it turns out that it's not really magic. When you get good results, that's the effort of prompting. It's structured communication that really can level up your results.
Absolutely. So now we're going to give you what we are calling the universal truths of prompting. So there's a really simple 5-step framework that Google's developed that you can use for any prompt. And then we'll dive into a couple of other like more specialized frameworks. So we're going to start by giving you some kind of general tips, and then we'll get into some more specific ones for more specific responses.
And again, we'll go through some examples to kind of bring this home and make this make sense, but we do kind of want to dive into a little bit more of the, technical educational component of this so you know what's sitting behind the scenes. So think of this 5-step framework as your foundation. Every good prompt should include these elements. Let me run through some steps here. So step 1 is a task. Be really clear about what you want the AI to do. So instead of suggest a gift, say suggest a gift related to some topic for my friend's birthday, right? Step 2, a persona. So define the role you want the AI to be. So act as a subject matter expert with deep knowledge of your topic, right? Step 3, format. So specify how you want the output organized. So organize the data into a table with columns for gift type, price range, and where to buy. Step 4, context. So the more context you provide, the better your output will be. So what is context? Context is a lot of the data that exists. So like who your gift is for, what do they like, what are all the things they're interested in, what are the things they've done in the past, what are the gifts you've given them in the past that have worked or haven't worked. It's like all of the data. For your business, the context would be if you were trying to come up with pricing, right? You would give it all of the data on your SKUs and your products and their current pricing to come up with new pricing. So I think of context as a lot of the data that you can provide that gives the backstory. And then step 5, the last one is references. So provide examples when helpful. For example, like saying what your person really liked. This person loved the custom character art I got that person last year. So provide something personalized this year, right? Giving an example can kind of also help fine tune so that the model knows what to give.
So instead of just suggest a birthday gift, you're having a really detailed conversation with someone who actually knows what your friend is going to be looking for.
Yeah. But remember, this is just the starting point. Again, that magic happens in the iteration as you ask more and more things. So we're going to talk about a principle here, and I love this because it's the principle is the ABI principle. Always be iterating, and Jess and I are movie buffs, so anytime you have a little play on the always be closing from Glenn Ross, I'm going to be into it. So um, with our always be iterating idea, the pitfall is most people send one prompt and give up if it's not perfect. Like you didn't get what you wanted. You didn't nail the presentation I wanted you to produce on the first draft. And so I'm done with it. But if you're to get really good, you iterate. And so let's run through a couple of methods we use.
So the first method is to revisit the framework. So you go back and you add, if you don't get the response that you want, or you feel like you could have something that's a little bit better, go back and just add more context, better examples, tweak that persona a little bit more. So give some more details about the person, all those little things just to give it a little bit more to work with. So like maybe your first attempt was marketing expert, but what you really need to say is email marketing specialist for e-commerce business, something like that, that just gives it a little bit more context, and that's going to improve the output.
Yeah, and method two, is really like break it down. So if your prompt isn't working, maybe in a subtle way or in a very advanced way, separate it into shorter sentences or bullet points to really be clear on what you're providing, the context that you're providing. So instead of one long paragraph, try a bulleted approach of, okay, first bullet, you're a marketing expert. Second bullet, focus on email marketing for SaaS. Third bullet, our open rates dropped 15% last quarter. That's some context in the background. Fourth bullet, we need 5 specific tactics to improve engagement. Personally, I really like asking for a specific number of outputs that I'm trying to get. Give me 10 of these things. Give me 5 of these things, or give me the top 5 ones that you can provide. And then, maybe a fifth bullet, format as an action plan. Again, what is that? What is the instructions? What is the output you're trying to get?
So the method 3 is to try different phrasing. So sometimes the same request with different words will get completely different results. And instead of writing product copy, try write a story about how this product fits into the lives of our target customer demographic. So again, you're just giving it that little bit more to work with, because product copy is really generic, but writing a story, that turns it into something that's a little bit more emotional and a little bit more, connects with your audience, but also just gives it a little bit more structure as well.
Yeah, and kind of the last method here is add constraints. So this kind of gets into positive prompting and negative prompting. At some point, we'll probably go back to our image generation example from the first episode. Negative prompts in image generation can be incredibly important. So this adding constraints can be really useful if your results are too broad. You may want to try to narrow the focus. So in our example, especially around marketing, maybe ask it to only suggest solutions that are under $1,000, or focus on tactics that we can implement with 5 hours of work, or that we can implement this week. So again, you're really focusing the LLM on, okay, give me something I can do right now.
Or even something around how much time you have a week to dedicate to something. If you don't have a ton of time to dedicate to marketing, you can say, I want you to give me some responses that I can do in a 3-hour period, because you don't have, 10 hours to be spending on something every week. And then the other thing that's really important to remember is different types of examples. You can use images, or you can ask for a visual output, or you can work with data, you can upload a spreadsheet, you can give it lots of stuff to work with. And actually it's better when you give the LLM lots of things to work with, because again, you're showing it what you want, and then it just allows it to understand what you want it to replicate.
Yeah, that's so important. That's, again, going back to the context. For me, I really feel like context is everything when trying to utilize LLMs. I mean, sometimes I'll go and post like a whole PDF, or I'll take a giant CSV and throw it in there as my context. It just helps kind of ground the LLM and what you're trying to get out of it. So that is all really useful, I think, as a starter. If you want to start getting a little bit more in the weeds and a little bit more technical, or if you have specific, outputs you're trying to get, it might be relevant to use a framework. And so we've come up with a couple frameworks here. These are by no means all of the frameworks. There's a ton of different
No, there's a
options.
lot.
We're
And
going
I
to
should,
focus on. Go ahead, Jess.
I was just going to say, we should also say that these are kind of the most well-known ones. They're not ones that we specifically came up with. These are kind of generally recognized as pretty standard frameworks, but they're definitely the most effective.
Yeah, and so we're going to cover two, and I think these aren't like Jeff said, these are pretty widely regarded as the most effective frameworks. I think maybe at some point we'll go through some more of them. We'll provide some resources, but this is ones you can use in your everyday. So first one we're going to look at is framework number one. It's called RACE: role, action, context, and expectation. This is pretty consistent with what we were talking about before. Again, like I really zero in on that context piece, but it should be your go-to for getting like expert level advice. So let me break down how that works. The role, start with you are a blank and be specific. So, use the example from before, not a marketing expert, but and a marketing expert, experienced B2B email marketing specialist with expertise in SaaS companies. I mean, that's very specific. Action is the next part of that. So tell the LLM exactly what to do. Analyze this email campaign and suggest improvements. And then again, my favorite, the context. So this is all of the background. Our open rates dropped 15% last quarter, and maybe explain why, or give it some of the data that shows some of the inputs of why it dropped 15% last quarter. And then say we're targeting IT decision makers at companies with 100 to 500 employees. So now you're giving it, like, from a marketing perspective, like persona, all of the different components of who you're targeting and what you're doing, so that it has the context and narrows its focus. And then lastly, that expectation. Be clear about what you want back. So again, provide 5 specific or 10 specific actionable recommendations with expected impact, or with an impact to improve my open rates.
So you can really start to see that instead of just saying, help me with my email marketing, which is extremely generic, so you're going to get that more generic response back. By implementing the RACE framework, you're able to get something that's much more specific, much more targeted, and is going to actually be much more helpful to you in the long run than just that super generic initial response.
Exactly. So let me give you a real example that we used last week. You are, again, so there's the role. You are an experienced financial advisor specializing in small business cash flow management. I mean, if you're working on your books, this is maybe the one to use. Now here's the action. Analyze our Q1 cash flow report and suggest ways to improve our working capital position. Now, again, the context, that's super important, right? So we're a growing consultancy with inconsistent monthly revenue and high upfront project costs. And maybe even to add to context, I would throw in a spreadsheet that shows some of your project costs, your monthly revenue. Just do a little bit of a data dump here. And then lastly, the expectation. Provide a ranked list of 5 strategies with implementation difficulty and expected timeline. So now you clearly know what you're going to get out of it.
And what did you get back?
Okay, so what we got back
That's the real question.
Yeah, that's a great question. But honestly, the results are much more impressive than just tell me what to do with my working capital position. Instead, we got a very detailed analysis with specific recommendations. I got my 5 strategies. So some of those were like milestone-based billing. It broke down a couple different ways we can establish a line of credit, and actually said which vendors would be relevant for our type of business. It created a cash flow forecast model. Now, again, I think you probably want to iterate on that a little bit, but that's where you could start doing some scenario analysis. So it gave me, one output, but, I would probably take that and iterate to come up with a couple scenarios based on, what we end up doing. So it ends up being something that we needed, right? It was actually actionable intelligence, not just like generic advice about, hey, manage your money better.
I mean, duh. But also, I think that is a great example also of how you can just keep having the conversation. So it comes back with a strong response, but then you just continue to give it more context. And as you say, you keep iterating it, but you just keep fleshing it out until you actually get the real thing that is useful.
Yeah, and what's important on this is, okay, I have a background in finance, but if I didn't and I was completely novice to this, that using that prompt and that example we gave you would help you really level up and get the answers you needed without any financial background. Okay,
Absolutely.
let's go into our second framework. This one is CARE: context, action, result, example. This is really good for problem solving because it forces the LLM to understand both your challenge and your outcome. Jess, why don't you run us through a couple of what CARE is?
Yeah, so the first is context. So a good example of this would be something like our customer service team is overwhelmed, which I'm sure is something that many businesses have to deal with. So our customer service team is overwhelmed. Response times have increased from 2 hours to 8 hours over the past month, which of course in turn leads to angry customers, which no one ever wants.
Yeah.
And then the action would be to suggest ways to reduce response time without hiring additional staff. We then lead into the result, which is we want to get back to 2 hour response times within 30 days. So you're going back to something that you've already had. So again, it's giving it that kind of really actionable, this is where we want to be. And then example, again with the examples. So for instance, we could implement chatbots for common questions or create better self-service resources. So put an FAQ page on the page or something like that.
Yeah, I think the example part is key because it shows the AI the type of thinking that you're looking for. Again, it narrows that focus.
Exactly. So you're not just asking for the generic solutions, you're asking for you're kind of guiding the AI towards a really practical, implementable idea.
Okay, so now let's dive into some more examples. I think we're going to keep trying to reinforcing this idea so that it becomes very natural to you when you open up your ChatGPT or you open up your Claude, you can just start to use some of these frameworks without really having to think about the framework. It just becomes very natural and intuitive. So let me go through a couple more examples. Jess and I both have some favorite ones. I'm going to start with kind of the weak prompt, and then I'll show you what the improved prompt is. So the weak prompt: write a sales email. If you just opened up ChatGPT and said, write a sales email, it's going to be vague. There's no audience. There's no product, tone, goal. There's no context. It has no idea what it's going to say. So you're going to get something incredibly generic. Instead, write a follow-up sales email from a B2B SaaS founder to a prospect who downloaded our white paper last week. The goal is to book a demo. Keep it concise and friendly, under 150 words. You might even, to improve that prompt further, you might even put in the white paper or a summary of what the white paper is, or you might actually say, like, this prospect, what kind of company they work at. And so why this works, it defines context, the sender role, that they're a prospect, the timing, the target audience. It gives a clear call to action. And then you gave it the tone, concise and friendly. So this is all very critical for getting good output. Let me give one more, which is summarize this. No clue who the summary is for or how detailed it should be. And I should preface this by saying, summarize this, and I'm sure you gave it, something to summarize. So you have to give it some, obviously some data there. But it still doesn't know who it's for or how detailed it should be in that summary. So the better prompt is, summarize the following investor memo into 3 key insights suitable for a busy venture investor reading on their mobile device. Use punchy bullets. So why this is really good is it adds structure. It gives 3 bullets. Again, that specificity on how much to produce. It gives the audience, that venture investor. It also provides the delivery style, that tone, punchy. And it also gives it the medium by which this person is going to actually engage with that content. So it's a little bit more specific on how they might consume it by being mobile friendly.
One of my examples is give me a blog post, on the marketing side. There's a lot of content that has to be created. So the generic phrase would be, give me a blog post. There's no topic, there's no tone or length or who your reader is going to be. It's going to be incredibly generic. It's not going to be helpful in the slightest. So a better example would be, write a blog post that is 600 words maximum for our Shopify store blog. Your audience is going to be eco-conscious moms between 30 and 45. Your topic is going to be how to choose sustainable back to school gear, and you want the tone to be friendly. I would also throw in something around SEO optimization. So really kind of get those keywords in there. So just really with that example, obviously you're giving it a target audience, you're giving it a specific topic and a specific tone of voice and the word count, because you sometimes have a cap on how many words you can use. And so all of this is going to be much more useful. And then, you keep tweaking it to make sure that it's your own style of writing, but you're going to get something that's much more useful out of that initial, that.
Yeah, I think that word count could be really useful, as we deal with all these
I use the
different.
word count thing all the time for LinkedIn posts and stuff.
Exactly. So know what medium you're putting it into. If it's your store blog, there's probably no, limit, but you do want to keep it, digestible. But
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
Jess's point, if you're doing on LinkedIn, you only get 300 words. So you need to
Yeah,
make
something
sure
like that.
it's in that. Yeah. This one I really like because very few of us are legal experts and are lawyers. Especially as a business owner, you often have to work with contracts and legal matters, but that's probably not your background. So this one I really like, which is paste a contract into ChatGPT or to Claude and say, explain this. I guess the negative prompt is just say, explain this contract. And you'll get a summary and it'll probably help you a little bit, but it's still a little too broad. It doesn't really say who's asking or how complex the explanation should be, or maybe what you want it to break down. Like if there's specific key components that you want to focus on that are relevant to your risk profile, you kind of need to give it more. So the better prompt would be act like a legal operations manager or act like a paralegal. Explain the key risks and the red flags in this SaaS vendor agreement to a non-legal executive. Like you're basically saying, explain it to me like a non-legal executive, and then say, use plain English. You don't want it to give it back to you a bunch more legalese. So sometimes it's very helpful to say plain English.
Or if we throw back to last week, you could have it explain it to you like it's gossip, which actually we joke about that, but it is actually a great, for something like a legal document, you have to have it explain it to you in a way that you can understand. So while the gossip is perhaps an extreme example, it does show that you can ask it to do these things.
Yeah, because ultimately you're trying to get it to simplify the language. And so that's, that last bit can be really helpful.
I've got one more, and I'm sure that this one is going to be relevant for a lot of our listeners. The generic prompt is help me with my time management, but that's way too open-ended, right? Like, what's your job? What's your work life like? What's your personal life like? How many hours a week? Do you have to leave by 3 p.m. so you can go pick your kids up? You need to give it a little bit more structure and context. What are your pain points? What are the things you really need help with? So a better prompt would be act like an executive coach. I'm a founder juggling product sales and hiring. Suggest a weekly time blocking system that helps me prioritize and reduce burnout, because that is a real problem with all small business owners and entrepreneurs. But the reason why that this works, or this one's better, is that it's much more personalized to you. It's adding a role, it's giving a really specific problem, and it defines the style of solution that you need. So time blocking being the thing that you need it to come back with. So those are my examples. So to finalize the points here, just try to check your prompts against who is the AI acting as, what is the output supposed to be, why does the user need it, and who is the output for?
Yeah, so let's talk about where people go wrong. And I think the two biggest issues that you need to watch out for. We've touched upon this and we will continue to touch upon this because it's so important when working with LLMs. The two of them are hallucinations and then biases. So for the hallucination issue, LLMs will sometimes make up facts or stats, or, in our favorite AI gone wrong segment, we'll talk about they make up whole books and references. And these are going to sound credible because, again, the AI is trained on other versions of it, but they may be completely false. So you do need to verify important information, dates, statistics, check the citations. You can ask for citations for the document, click on it, go make sure it's real, and if it's a 404 and it goes to no website, it may not be real. So do a little digging there.
I had this last week actually I was writing a blog post, and I'm going to name names here. It was Perplexity that did me dirty, unfortunately. As big of a
Your
fan of it
favorite
as
one. Your
I
favorite
know,
one.
I was so disappointed, like genuinely disappointed. I was asking for something that happened a couple weeks ago, event that happens every year. And for some reason, it just kept giving me stuff from last year, even though I gave it a time bound. I wanted it for this year's version. And so I went back and fact checked it. And in the end, I ended up scrapping the whole thing because by the time I kind of got rid of the incorrect references, the whole tone of the piece changed and it kind of didn't work in the way that I wanted it to work. So I just got rid of the whole thing. But I'm so glad I double checked that because it actually would have been really bad if I hadn't. Just your reminder that hallucinations are a real thing and you always have to double check.
Absolutely. And then the second issue, this is a little bit more difficult to check, but biases. So AI reflects the biases in its training data. And we kind of talked about the training. So be aware that it might default to certain demographics, perspectives, or approaches. So you need to be careful that you're not putting it into your blog post or you're not excluding certain perspectives. So try to actively prompt for diverse viewpoints. It's super important that you're being representative, that you're narrowing the tone and the voice and the audience so that you're correctly speaking to it. Within its training data, it has the ability to talk to all different perspectives, but you need to narrow your focus so it can.
Yeah, biases are a real thing, which again, I think this is a good one to have an expert on about because it's an issue. But a really good example of this, and you particularly see this with image generation. If you ask it for business leader examples, it probably will default to well-known male CEOs. So in that instance, you should probably include diverse examples across gender, ethnicity, and industry as well, because otherwise it's going to give you a bunch of old white dudes.
Yeah, and no one wants that. So let's get into a couple common pitfalls as well. So we've talked about some of the issues, but some pitfalls, and we can run through this kind of quickly. But pitfall number one, not being specific enough without context.
Never accept the first output. The first response is rarely the best. You never ever take its first response because it can always do better.
Yeah, and here's a little bit of a tactical advice on this next one. So if you get a great response, you designed an amazing prompt, save that, right? So we specifically have a library of successful prompts that we've used. And it's honestly what kind of helped us design this episode. We have enough experience to get some pretty good prompts in that library.
And also, top tip, a lot of prompt libraries exist out there in the world. If you Google some, you will get some pretty good starting points. So if you're kind of struggling to come up with something, find a prompt library, grab something, and then tailor it to your needs because someone will have put the work in to develop that prompt, and you can just make it relevant for your specific example.
Absolutely.
And just remember that these are conversation starters. They're not, one-shot commands.
Yeah, and this is where I'm getting better. I wanted to design the perfect prompt, but I have to remind myself that this is a collaboration. It's not a vending machine. So the first output isn't going to be perfect, but give it that feedback. Tell it what's wrong.
Yeah, so you can say things like make this punchier or aim this at a Gen Z audience or turn it into a headline. Don't be afraid to have the conversation.
Yeah, the magic, to use that word again, happens in the back and forth. LLMs are great at adjusting. So treat it like working with a human intern. Guide it, iterate it, and it'll get there.
Absolutely. And that wraps up Prompt Engineering 101. We might go through a couple more frameworks in the future because there are so many and some of them are really useful, but we've thrown enough information at you for for today. So we'll stop for now.
All right, so typically here we talk about our community poll, which this week was about your favorite LLMs.
But in the interest of full transparency, with the 3-day weekend in both the UK and the US, we posted the poll a little bit late this week and it's still running. So we don't actually have a response to talk to you or to talk you through yet. So we'll aim for that for next week.
So go take a look at our LinkedIn or Spotify and put, your response to the LLM, and we'll have 2 poll results to discuss next week.
Can't wait for the results.
Amazing. Let's talk about some news that actually affects how you'll be using AI day to day. So there's 2 big developments this week that might seem like kind of your typical Silicon Valley headlines and maybe something you don't think is all that important, but they're actually signaling major shifts for how small businesses will interact with AI.
So first up, Netflix co-founder Reed Hastings has just joined Anthropic's board of directors. Anthropic has Claude, the LLM, which we obviously talk about a lot. And this seems like pretty typical tech executive musical chairs because they all tend to move around fairly frequently. But this is actually a pretty big move for entrepreneurs and for small businesses.
Yeah, and here's why this kind of matters, to you as the small business owner beyond just some, maybe boardroom shuffling. But Hastings didn't just build Netflix. If we look at what Netflix has done is it revolutionized how content got created, distributed, and now consumed. I mean, binge watching wasn't a thing before Netflix. I mean, I know it's a long time ago now, but at one point it was a DVD by mail service. And we basically turned that from a DVD by mail service into a global streaming giant that has, as Jess and I can talk about at length, it's really changed multiple industries, but really the entertainment industry by far.
I mean, there's a reason why every single one, there's a reason why you pay 20 subscription services or pay for 20 streaming subscription services now. And it's all because of Netflix, because everyone is chasing after what Netflix does. So,
And isn't it
you
sad?
can't.
Think about the days when we were complaining about cable and we wanted to not have a big cable, and now we spend way more money on
I
all these
mean,
different services.
we're all going back to bundling anyway. That's a whole nother conversation. But basically, so Reed Hastings could potentially be bringing that sort of mindset to Anthropic now. And it really signals that they're not just thinking about AI as a chat tool, but they're thinking about how AI can fundamentally change how businesses operate.
Yeah, and I think when you look at his track record, he's been obsessed with user experience and making some pretty complex technology very simple. So Netflix made watching movies effortless and brought it into the home. If we extrapolate, imagine what that same approach might be applied to AI for small businesses, for example.
Yeah, and the timing on this is really interesting because, as we discussed last week, Anthropic and Claude is already kind of seen as the business-friendly company with their focus on safety and reliability. You mentioned putting some legal documents into ChatGPT earlier, and actually, you shouldn't do that. You should give it to Claude if you're going to be looking at legal documents. But if you add someone with Hastings' track record of scaling consumer-friendly products, it just shows that they're really serious about making AI accessible to everyone and to the exact sort of people that we're trying to talk to here, which is small businesses and entrepreneurs, not just the big enterprise companies.
Yeah. And I think Claude's vision and Hastings' kind of philanthropic efforts are really closely aligned. So I am pretty excited to see how Claude continues to evolve and develop as that ethical AI provider. But, I think for business owners and professionals, we'll see Claude evolve into something like a more complete operating system. Right now, it's, a desktop app, or you go to the website and it feels like a chatbot. But I think, just as Netflix became like the platform for entertainment where you go for everything, Anthropic might be positioning Claude to become the complete platform for business intelligence, automation.
And speaking of Claude's evolution, Anthropic also just rolled out a voice mode for Claude. And this is actually going to be super useful and something that I personally am going to end up using all the time.
Yeah, I think, we look at voice features sometimes as a nice to have convenience, but I'm using dictation a lot more. I think especially for business owners and entrepreneurs, this can be a real productivity gold. Because instead of having to sit down at your laptop and type something out, sometimes I feel like texting or typing just gets really tedious and it stops me from putting something in. Instead, you hit the dictation or the voice command on Claude and just again, going back to having a conversation, just spit out everything you can think of over the course of a minute or 2 minutes. Give it all of that context that it needs by just kind of brainstorming and talking through it, and boom, you might get a really, really good result.
Yeah, for me, I'm do my best thinking when I'm out on the move. So like if I'm going for a walk or whatever, I'll be listening to a podcast and I'll always come up with something and then I immediately forget it. I do try, and sometimes I take a voice memo, sometimes I write myself a note, but to actually be able to put it into Claude where I can just do the brain dump would actually be incredibly helpful. So I'm literally only launched about 3 days ago, so I haven't really had a chance to use it, but I've got the Claude app, and we should flag that it's only available on mobile devices for right now, but can't wait to be out and about and start using it and kind of putting it through its paces. Because I think we all kind of got used to this a little bit with Siri, but I think this is going to be a more useful tool. From what I've seen of it already, this is going to be a good one.
It's all about reducing friction. I think this is just
Yeah,
another
that's
example of
the
reducing friction,
exact
right?
way to put it. Yeah.
So when you combine these two developments, both Hastings joining the board and, we've talked about, what he brings from a strategic vision, and then adding in Cloud's voice capabilities, you're looking at AI that's evolving from just a tool to actually, a business partner that you can work with.
Yeah, so it's really just it's moving more from I need to go to use AI for this task to I need to discuss this with my AI advisor. And I think all of these Anthropic announcements combined with another really big announcement that we're not going to get too into today, but it was also announced last week, that OpenAI, ChatGPT's parent company, bought the new product development company by a guy called Johnny Ive. You may not have heard of him, but Johnny Ive was the big product guy at Apple. He's the one that developed the iPhone. He developed the iPod. Like every major product that you can think of from Apple, he had a hand in. He was incredibly involved for a very, very long time there. So that's just really showing OpenAI's shift towards this hardware product space as well. So I think that we're just starting to see now that everything is shifting more from that kind of one-off task to incorporating it much more into our daily lives.
Yeah. So I think, all of these developments point to the same thing, which is AI is becoming less about, learning a new tool and more about, a complete operating system that you can have better business conversations. And so for, you as the small business owner or the entrepreneur wearing a million different hats, that's going to be exactly what you need. How do you use these tools without friction, right at your hands, and in a way that you can just be talking to in a normal conversation?
Moving on to our favorite segment, which is AI gone wrong. And speaking of our friends over at OpenAI, they recently had to roll back a ChatGPT update that made it too agreeable. So apparently it was being overly sycophantic and just telling people what they wanted to hear instead of providing balanced feedback. AI's always a little bit like this, but this most recent update that had to be rolled back was particularly bad.
Yep. And this is a perfect example of why prompt engineering matters. So sometimes you need the LLM to challenge your ideas, not just validate them.
Yeah, and in this particular instance, it was doing some things that it really shouldn't be doing. Like it was telling people to, someone said that they had stopped taking their medication, and its response was, "That's a great idea." I mean, it's never a great idea to stop taking your medication unless you've had your doctor's permission. Don't ask ChatGPT about it. But also, ChatGPT should not be telling you that it's okay to stop taking your medication.
A couple quick tips on that, that I think can help is, ask for pros and cons. So that will really force the model to analyze, not just validate. So you can see the negatives, maybe even challenge it to critique you. We talk about having a conversation after it gives you some data, actually like have it play devil's advocate with you. I think you're going to get a little bit better thinking, and it should reduce the like echo chamber that sometimes, the iterative process can create. And then, maybe also compare alternatives. So, this kind of anchor the model on critical thinking rather than just complying and telling you, yes, great idea, go ahead and do that right away.
Also, you can challenge it, especially because a lot of the times, even though the majority of them are now connected to the internet, the training data will be older. So sometimes it will come back to you with slightly older information, and then you can push it and say, no, that's old, or this is still the response that I'm getting. And then it will go, you're right, this has now been updated, and it will come back with the more accurate, more up-to-date version. So you just kind of have to bear all of that in mind. And it's okay to push back because it's absolutely not always right, as we have discussed on many occasions.
And what we're not saying is to ask it, is this good, right? Because it's probably just going to say, sure, this is
always it's going to kiss your ass. That's what it's designed to do.
You need to really go get, real insight, challenge it, ask it the whys, have it break down why it's good or why it's bad. So then you can use some critical thinking on top of that to say, okay, I agree with why it's good, or, I disagree with why it's bad.
So I think that is us wrapping up for the day. Sorry, we've thrown a lot of information at you today. So, bear with us as we start to work our way through some of these more beginner things.
Yeah, but if you take one thing from today's episode, make it this. Stop treating AI like a search engine. It's not Google. Start treating it like a conversation with an expert consultant.
If you use the frameworks, if you provide the context, if you're really specific about what you need, you'll really start to see your interactions with the AI transform from frustrating and generic and not particularly helpful to something that's going to be incredibly useful and productive, and you're actually going to get something beneficial from it.
And don't forget, we want to hear about your use cases and your wins. So if you utilize some of these tips and tricks, if you try out a framework, if you find a prompt library that you're specifically, I think is helpful, email us at hello@earlyadopter.ai. Remember, adopter without the E. And share your favorite prompts. Share what you learned. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Early Adopter, where we help make AI your unfair advantage. And until next time, keep innovating and stay curious.
Thanks, Jess. And remember, you don't need to master everything. You just need to master one thing and start there. So from all of us at Early Adopter, we'll see you next week.
And Kyle, I will see you next week live in person.
So excited.
Can't wait. Bye.
Bye, Jess.